You're live.
We are live, and this is the 26th of March, Senate Finance Committee meeting. Going to call the meeting to order. And today, since we're running much later than we anticipated with floor time, we're just going to actually continue our discussion with Tax Commissioner Bolio about last week. You remember the link up through March 31st seemed to be going on 3/15, and we needed to take some testimony fairly quickly. That's since been stripped out and is going to be dealt with in committee of conference. But I thought we'd take some more time today for the commissioner to talk a little bit more about the consequences of not linking, the consequences of linking, if any other than 12.5 million, I guess, dollar loss. And then there is some discussion about changing the linking system taking place in the other body, and I gather at the tax department. So he was going to talk to us a little bit about thoughts going on there. So, Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. There's a lot to unpack on this, right? And normally it's not a very star-studded affair every year, but as is the case with so many things being unusual this year, the link up is. So, very brief background that I'm sure this committee is familiar with, but Vermont has what is known as static conformity to the Internal Revenue Code and laws of the United States, which means that as the feds change tax law, it does not automatically change Vermont tax law. And it requires legislative action to link up to the federal tax law. Now, Vermont also does it retroactively every year. So each year, the legislature, almost every year that I'm aware of, the legislature discusses and then ultimately passes a link up to the current tax year and through the prior calendar year. So said another way, the link up that the legislature has been discussing this session has been for tax year 20 and had been through December 31st of 2020. And those tax year 20 is the tax year that everybody's filing right now, tax returns for today. And I had come back, and we've actually talked about this a few times this year, because the first time we talked about this was on the taxability of the Paycheck Protection Program. Actually, it was on the deductibility of the expenses, which was the surprise element that came out in the December bill from the feds. And we talked about challenges for the department in not linking up to that, and the committee had been sympathetic to that point and willing to pass that link up so that we wouldn't have to have those issues. Then there was another surprise provision that was, if the first one was not unprecedented, the second one certainly was, in that as part of ARPA, the U.S. Congress passed again retroactive for tax year 2020 tax law. And that tax law was an exclusion of the first $10,200 of unemployment benefits received by any individual, so long as they made less than $150,000 in 2020. And so the big challenge for the department is the same as it was on the PPP, which is that tax forms in Vermont on the individual side start with adjusted gross income. That's the definition in law, and that's where our forms start, on adjusted gross income. So to the degree that the Congress changes the rules of what is adjusted gross income after the fact, it becomes extremely difficult for us to be able to change directions successfully, particularly midstream, right? Because our system is programmed so that our adjusted gross income will match what the federal definition of adjusted gross income is. All of the software vendors that provide tax preparation software have coded that, and our forms and instructions say that. So to change right now is really an unprecedented effort, and from my standpoint would really have devastating impacts for Vermonters and for the department. At a minimum, we would need to change those forms and instructions, get the software vendors to change their systems, and then change our system. And normally that's a several month process preparing for tax season every year. For instance, we started to prep for this year's tax season last August. So, it's a difficult spot, and it's also would be a difficult spot for taxpayers to navigate, right, as they try to understand the changing rules. Now, for transparency, there are also some challenges to linking up on this provision, right? And those challenges materialize from the fact that some taxpayers who received UI in 2020 had filed before ARPA became federal law, right? And so those taxpayers did not take this exclusion because it did not exist. And so linking up to this exclusion would mean that we would have to take action on those taxpayers to either give them, to almost certainly give them an additional refund. From my chair, the challenges in decoupling at this stage are far larger than the challenges in conforming and dealing with that audience. And there are three main differences that I see, the first of which is the volume. So we have about 20,000 people, 20,000 taxpayers, where at least one person in the unit has UI. So that means maybe a single filer or a married filer where at least one partner had UI claimed. But we have about 60,000 that have either filed since ARPA became law or have yet to file. And really the vast majority in that is still in the yet to file. And so we'd be dealing with challenges in a much larger audience if we choose not to link up to it. And the other is that it is, as you might imagine, much easier to send folks additional money than it is to ask them for more money. And the operational impacts of that are substantially different as well, right? Because for one thing, the IRS is exploring this very issue as we speak, and how to handle those that filed before ARPA became law. As it stands today, and this is not final, but this is just the way the winds are blowing and the way that the IRS is speaking publicly, I believe that they're going to attempt to make the adjustments themselves. And in addition to that, there are many states, including ours, and also organizations that interact with the IRS on behalf of states, such as the Federation of Tax Administrators, that are working closely with the IRS and strongly encouraging them to help states solve that problem. So for instance, can the IRS send a file to each state with different adjustments that they made to folks who found themselves in that position and are entitled to an additional refund? So that might materialize as one way to help solve the problem for the group of 20,000, whereas decoupling would not have that kind of partnership at all. And then not everybody is going to pay, right? Which means there are going to be downstream effects to that. There would be collection impacts to that. There would be future offset impacts to that. And I think, as much as we're all tax nerds and we're following this stuff and we're really in the thick of it, most Vermonters are not, right? And this is going to feel like a surprise tax bill for them. And I would also note for the committee, I think challenges that we would all feel if the state took the position of helping the businesses who were in the situation where they received PPP and getting that tax benefit, but then not providing it to individuals who got unemployment during the year. So, I understand that this is very likely a frustrating place for the state legislature to be, just as I recognized that on the PPP issue, that because of the timing of how this was passed by the Congress and the way that the form structures work, it very much feels like the urgency that I'm bringing this to you and saying, please link up to this provision. I get it that it feels like the legislature isn't having an opportunity to weigh in on this. I simply don't see another path to success. I think that it would require my department to shut down tax season, shut down refund processing, and redeploy those individuals to changing these things. And there is a cost involved, a financial cost as well, right? Because the joint fiscal office and tax have come up with a consensus estimate for fiscal year 21 one-time foregone revenue of 12.6 million to link up to this provision. And, I get that the legislature has been budgeting as if that 12.6 million existed. So, I understand that there are costs to this, and I understand that it's very likely a frustrating place to be to hear from me that I don't see a path to decoupling from this successfully at this stage. But I really do feel like the impacts would be devastating for my department. I think it would greatly impair our ability to provide service to Vermonters. And for that reason, I also think the costs to Vermonters would be substantial. And the only other piece that I wanted to say on this is I don't celebrate the position that I find myself in, right? Of coming here and saying with such urgency that this is the only path that I see. And so I have asked my team, and also I believe your colleagues in House Ways and Means and the other body have asked Ledge Council and JFO to start thinking about, are there other ways to do this link up, right? The structure of the link up that we do today that links up retroactively through the current tax year creates a situation where it puts the department in a tough spot every summer and fall, where we have to guess, is the legislature going to link up or not? And our forms have to pick one outcome or the other. And the smart money has always been on linking up to most of these retroactive provisions. When we've chosen to decouple, we have been able to do so with analysis and forward-looking provisions, right? The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is really the most salient example in recent history, where there were forward-looking provisions. The legislature and the administration agreed that they were not all the proper move to let them flow through to Vermont, and we worked together to take action to stop that. When it happens retroactively, none of us has the time to be able to effectively navigate that. So there are ways theoretically to change the link up. Some states do it prospectively, but there are also costs to that, right? In either method, you tend to have a first year problem, right? So you could theorize that the legislature could link up to the prior tax year, and then the department could produce forms that link up to the prior tax year. But to the degree that after the legislature adjourns, there's any additional federal tax policy that passes that the legislature likes in the subsequent session and would want to link up to retroactively, that then puts the department in a very similar challenging spot operationally, because the forms are assuming no link up. So really the challenges with the timing of retroactive tax legislation creating a first year problem for states. And that first year problem is either that it's very hard to decouple if a state is assuming conformity, or it's very hard to conform if a state is assuming not having conformity. That said, I'm not here to push a position on whether the status quo is the best path or rethinking this is the best path. Frankly, I'm very much looking forward to working together and having that discussion, seeing what the pros and cons are for different approaches, because I do think that there are pros and cons and there are costs, not only for the department, but for Vermonters and tax preparation and all of that we should think through. So I would want to be really thoughtful if we're going to take an approach that changes how we do this. But I don't want to sit here today and say that there's not a better way to do it. There very well may be. And I would be a willing partner in at least exploring that.
Okay, committees. I got Senator Hardy, and then Senator Pearson, and then Senator Sorotkin. Okay, Senator
All right.
Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I think third time maybe is a charm. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm wondering, this has been super confusing to me because I thought we talked about it, and then I thought we hadn't, and then now anyway, it's gone back and forth, and hence our conversation on Monday about it. But do you have an estimate for the foregone revenue or the cost of the PPP portion of the program?
Not right at my fingertips, but that is actually Graham might have that, because I think we have a consensus estimate with JFO on that as well.
Graham just popped up, so.
Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office. So across all years, so we think our consensus with tax was that the impact of PPP would be spread out over 4 years. So the entirety of that 4 years is about $10.6 or $10.8 million. For fiscal year 20, because the potential link up's already, in 315, that sort of that potential money is almost, gone out the door. The fiscal year 22 impact was about 4.5 or 5 million. I don't have it right in front of me, but so if the legislature decided not to link up, to tax year 20, then I think it's another about 5.5 million for fiscal year 21. But again, that would require quite a lot of administrative challenges, I think, for the tax department to somehow get that money back from filers who already filed.
Okay, so, and the 12.6 million revenue loss that you mentioned for the UI is just in 21?
Just in 21.
Okay. I was just trying to get, and is that a multi-year impact too, Graham, or that's just a 1-year
Just
impact?
1 year, yes. I'm looking at my sheet again here that I just pulled up. Yeah, so for fiscal year 21, which is tax year, the PPP impact was 4.7, and then fiscal year 22, it's about 5.2. So the fiscal year 21 number, if you link up to December 31st of 2020, as was previously in H315, then that 4.7 in fiscal year 21 has kind of already gone. But if you sort of leave open the door to not allowing tax-free nature for PPP loans in tax year 21, then about $5.2 million is on the table of revenue impact.
For the PPP part of it.
For the
I think
PPP
that's what the House,
Yeah. And why is there a multi-year impact on the PPP but not the UI?
Because the PPP, so a few reasons. The first is businesses will be receiving loan forgiveness on their PPP loans at different points in time. So in our estimate, while most businesses took out PPP loans in tax year 20, so calendar year January to December, the majority of those loans will actually be forgiven in tax year 21 once they've proven that they've used the money for qualified purposes. So that's the first reason. The second reason is it stretches out over different time periods, because if a firm took a PPP loan, it was subsequently forgiven, and they used those loans for expenses. Say it decreased their taxable income to a point beyond zero, so they had negative taxable income, then they might be able to carry that forward to additional tax years of that loss. So that's another possible reason why you might see that. But I think that the main reason is because a lot of the PPP loans are forgiven in different tax years. That's why you have most of the impact flowing in fiscal year 21 and 22.
Just to clarify that too, sorry, Graham, if you did say this, but as far as I know, the legislature has only talked about so far the link up for tax year 20, right? There's two elements to the link up every year. It's the tax year that we're linking up for, and it's also the date through which Vermont law conforms with the federal law. So there's costs to both those years, but the legislature, to my understanding, has only so far been talking about language for linking up to tax year 20. So linking up for tax year 21 for these loans that were forgiven in 21 is I'm presuming a separate discussion.
Right. And the language, though, to link up to tax year 20 would have to be through March 31st, right? Isn't that
Well,
the language for conformity?
Yeah. So, and I might ask Abby to jump in here too, or Will, but I had originally proposed that from the tax department, but my understanding is the discussion in Ways and Means and what Abby has drafted is linking up to the entire IRC and laws of the US through December 31st, and then providing a separate section in that law that links up just to this UI provision. From my chair at the tax department, I'm indifferent on that. I think one of the concerns, and this is fair, was that the way that the effective dates work on the link up every year is it says it's for tax years 2020 and later. And there's no sneakiness there. The reason for that is so that if the legislature doesn't pass a future link up, there's some basis to be linked up. But I can understand the concern that if you just extend the date through which it's linking up, if it ends up applying to tax year 2021 because the legislature doesn't take a future action, that would automatically pull in some of these other provisions, which understandably the legislature is trying to separate that discussion. So I have no problem with that. I think we do need some kind of future basis in case the legislature doesn't take some action, but to the degree that the way it's drafted now prevents that automatic problem, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I don't know, Abby, did I say that right?
Yes, so for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, that is correct. This morning, the House Ways and Means Committee did see language that would link up the same language that you saw in H315 that was stripped out of the bill when it passed out of the Senate. It links up through the end of 2020, so that would pull in the PPP provisions. What House Ways and Means looked at this morning then links up just to the UI exclusion in the Rescue Plan Act. And then there was further discussion today about striking the typical language in the effective dates that says we link up starting on this tax year and going forward. And I agree with the commissioner that if it were a link up uniquely for, say, tax year 2020, then that would preclude any link up going forward. So it would require the legislature to take action to stay linked up, which might be another, it's a more forceful way of requiring consideration in the future of whether or not to link, and then whether or not to pull in particular provisions or everything. Hope that was clear.
And to say one clarifier on the end of that, I mean, if the legislature wants to strike the future year effective dates for that, I think it would require us to have a different, again, structure for the link up entirely, because we need some basis to produce forms come the fall. So it could either be prospectively linking up to a prior year or some other path that, again, I'm happy to have discussions moving forward on. I think that's a much bigger question that we should tackle, but I would recommend we do it separately from this more urgent issue of the UI.
Okay. Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess mine is a question maybe for you is, Madam Chair, this is now an appropriations bill that will get hammered out. So are we expected to offer our recommendation and give it to the Appropriations Committee? Because we're unlikely to have somebody on that conference.
Yeah, I am not at all clear about this. Last week, I thought I had missed something and it was a done deal, and that appropriations in the House knew what was going on. Apparently, at least the Senate didn't. I didn't want this committee we had discussions about the PPP, and I was concerned that was going in, and then this hit. And we did last week recommend that we hook up. I sent a 2-clause email, and apparently the chair read one. This is like 5 o'clock on Friday, and didn't get the second clause. And she just needs process. I think it's in.
Madam Chair, we've lost you.
That kind of a day. Anne, can you hear us?
Well, I was going to say, I continue to think we don't have a lot of good options, as the commissioner said, and that we should telegraph our support for the full link up, recognizing it is a cost. But swallowed on the PPP cost, and, personally think we should swallow on the UI tax benefit cost as well. And for what it's worth, since nobody is able to not give me the floor, I think that we should do the future link up question somewhere else in a tax bill that we shepherd through and work out with Ways and Means, not in a sort of fast track appropriations bill myself.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I agree with both of those.
Yeah, same.
So
You're the vice
is
chair.
Mark on? Is Mark available?
Or the
Yeah,
chair
Mark.
vote.
You don't need to raise your hand. You need to chair the meeting.
I
Did you
can
just
call it
see,
myself.
Faith just says that Mark should take over. Anne has no power, so she's,
Anne has
on the call.
unlimited power. She has no electricity. Okay.
yeah, well, yeah.
Um,
Senator McDonald, I was next up.
Senator Siraki.
I'm the ranking member for the record. Is that right? In case we lose McDonald's?
Yeah, how did that happen?
I'll pull the
Yeah,
plug.
I don't
Senator,
think we do that
Senator,
in this.
my plug, Senator Sarabki.
I got thrown off as ranking member. I don't get that. Anyhow, so is the commissioner still with us?
I'm here, Senator.
You are, okay. So I may have missed this, but I just want, and you're probably more attuned to this than anybody. The bill as it came over, 315, as it came over from the House, my understanding that Ways and Means had put their language in that bill and had made a decision on PPP. Is that correct?
So the timing on all of this, I believe that H315 had come over before ARPA had passed and had included link up language through 12/31/20. So that would have pulled in the CARES Act and H133 that included the PPP elements. Yes.
Okay, and just through calendar year 20, right?
That's right. And then the ARPA passed subsequent to that, that created this subsequent problem for us.
So if you have you been probably following it closer than anybody, is the Senate amendment, did that reopen the PPP discussion at all? Or are we has the Senate sort of agreed on PPP and it's just a question of the UI at this point?
I don't know if I want to speak for all your fellow senators, but my understanding, so to the degree that the Senate amendment stripped out the existing language that went through 12/31/20, that's a setback for PPP. However, the language that was discussed this morning in House Ways and Means, and I'm understanding will be recommended to House Appropriations, includes the 2020 PPP link up, is silent or does not include anything for 2021, and also includes the 2020 link up for UI. So
Well,
essentially resolving all of the outstanding issues for
Yeah.
2020, saying
We-
nothing on a future tax year.
I think we should just agree to go with that.
That's my recommendation as well.
All right. Okay. Okay,
Thank you.
that's strangest line.
Commissioner Bolio,
The-
if you could wave a wand and get rid of the parliamentary procedure that we participate in and create a way through this in which we go ahead and accept the federal way and avoid the bureaucracy that would require a change. But if you could wave a wand and make good on it to erase that, how would you do it?
I'm sorry, erase which part?
To
Senator?
simply, if we were to collect the monies that we, forgive the monies that we are stuck having to forgive, how could you come up with a scheme to get them back if you were in charge of everything and to get them back after they'd been filed?
I think we'd be talking about sending tax bills after tax season to folks who have filed.
Is that something you could press a few buttons and program and could happen at relatively less expense and less hassle than were we not to accept the change?
No, I think, there are costs and challenges to both ways here, right? The cost to accepting this exclusion is that we have the 20,000 who filed before it was law and we have to help get them more money. But I think the costs are larger for both Vermonters and the Department of Decoupling. Again, those most Vermonters are not watching this issue closely. They are going into their software package and they are filing today.
Of
And
course.
because Vermont forms start with adjusted gross income, that exclusion is automatically coming through to us. And they think they're filing correctly. There's nothing that lets them know that they might not be if we choose not to conform to this.
Yes.
And so if we send those 60,000 people a bill after the tax season that says, actually, you weren't filing correctly, that's going to come, I think, as a real shock for them. And I think that that's going to create a lot of blowback. I think it's going to create a much higher percentage of people who don't pay it than we would normally see. And that'll have downstream effects on collections and future offsets, which will have a downstream effect on our ability to close the tax gap in other ways that we think would be much less controversial.
Okay, so if the coinage was on the other side and it was a matter of getting money back to them rather than getting more money from them, it would be relatively simple.
Senator, it's always easier to give people more money than get more money from people.
I'm shocked. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Questions for the commissioner? Senator Hardy.
I don't know if I have a question, but it sounds like Ann wanted, or Senator Cummings, she says we can develop recommendations on Tuesday is what Faith put on the chat. But so I don't know what the timeline is, but I agree with Senator Sorokin that I think we should do both of these and then settle the separate question about future link ups in another bill, or I guess Pearson said that. And this is sort of similar to the conversation we were just having during our very dramatic floor debate that ended in a power outage about, taking care of
The electricity went
taking
off.
care of businesses and
The electricity went off. There was a power was taking place.
all right, the electricity went off and all the screens went off. Anyway, taking care of businesses and taking care of workers at the same time, and that we should be able to do both. And it makes sense, and it makes it administratively easier too. And even though there is a substantial, it's not nothing in terms of cost or revenue foregone.
Thank you. As the chair here for a moment, it seems like that's the course that we're about to take. Are there any questions that we would like to continue to ask that put us in better shape as we think of what we're going to recommend on Tuesday? Senator Bray.
No, it's not for Tuesday. It's really, I was going back to Senator Pearson's remark about, addressing future link ups and stuff in another bill. Since tax bills originate in the House, I don't know if we're always going to be stuck a little bit in batting cleanup, and the timing will not be great for us. Or maybe it's not a tax, it's a tax link up bill, and maybe we can originate that in the Senate. But we're fine. I see Ms. Shepherd nodding yes, so I guess we're not going to get thrown out for such a bill. Okay.
Yes.
Is there
I
any
could
more
review that.
questions about the options we might have before us or how to reach them? Senator Sorokin.
I just want to know if this is for Graham. Is Graham still with us? Hi, Graham.
Welcome, Graham.
Hi. Is my understanding correct that while Senator Kitchell has raised the argument that she's concerned that we can't afford the UI non-taxability, that somehow in the budget, they've already planned for the 6 million or whatever that the PPP is going to be tax deductible on?
I think it's a great question. My understanding after talking with Tom Cavett is that when they were working on the forecast, they did not there was no impact associated or anything related to the PPP. They knew of the PPP issue, but they thought there were so many things going on with PPP that the revenue impact there was not necessarily built in. So linking up to that, we've decided with tax and with Tom Cavett and Jeff Carr not to count that as a negative against the revenue available for the state, because at the time when they were building the forecast, it was under the assumption that PPP loans were going to be, they were going to be non-taxable if they were forgiven, but B, that the expenses were not going to be deductible. And that was changed, late December in HR 133. And so they did not put a factor necessarily for that in the forecast. So we're not counting it as a negative if we link up to the.
Isn't that different what you told us earlier, that there would be a $6 million hit to the revenues of the state, and they hadn't planned on that policy being changed in December?
I think it's so yes and no. So when we were first talking, I first came to this committee, I think in early January when they were building the forecast, they were looking into this. But I think ultimately they decided that there were so many ups and downs related to the PPP program and businesses in general that they sort of put, I don't know how to best describe this, but they almost put it into like a bucket of uncertainties that was built into the forecast. And so PPP, the deductibility of PPP expenses was put into that. The uncertainty about how profitable businesses would be was put into that. The uncertainties around how some new federal legislation would affect Vermont was put into that uncertainties bucket. And so that's what they, that's how they accounted for, the PPP situation. I agree that that's a confusing way of handling it. But I think the ultimate conclusion was that when we spoke with them, because we asked them specifically, if the legislature links up to the PPP provision, then we have an estimate of it. Is it a down or not? Because if they've included it in the forecast, if they included the PPP money as a up in the forecast, if we decouple from it, then it's down. But, and then the inverse is true. But ultimately, they said that you should not count this as a down to the forecast if you decouple. So that's how we're scoring it. On the flip side, if the committee or if the legislature were to decide that we were going to make a PPP loan that was forgiven in tax year 21, not to make that taxable, then we would count that as an up, most likely.
So in short, Graham, back a couple months ago, when we were told that things were going to be uncertain, the Appropriations Committee said, well, got work to do and we're going to move ahead with the understanding that we have 12 million more or 12 million less than we are now talking about having.
When the Appropriations Committee in the House started building their budget, they were under the impression that the revenue forecast did not.
As the
Could I
money
ask- could I try-
was the 12 million going to be there available, or was it going to be missing? Is that the impression they were under?
It was going to be there.
Okay, which is a reasonable thing. That's all, fine. That's the history. Senator Pearson.
Well, I was the same thought. The House just passed the budget 10 minutes ago.
Okay.
Are we now, did that assume 12 million? Or are we essentially handing Senator Probst a $12 million hole?
So if the budget just passed without,
The amendments.
if the House just passed the budget and it had language in it that linked up to this UI provision, then it would be a down of 12.6 million. My understanding after speaking with Steve on this is that they've planned for a contingency on this.
So if Graham, do you know whether the House budget assumed there would be 12 million or assumed that there wouldn't be when they acted today, 10 minutes ago?
I'm not sure. Maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Don't try and answer until you've found out. Okay. Thanks. No. Good. Either way, that's whatever they decided is what we are going to have to deal with one way or another, and we'll find out when we know, rather than speculate anymore.
I think it just depends on the language that Ms. Shepherd crafted today, whether that.
Yes, that's what it depends on. We don't know what that answer is, and when we find out, we'll know what it is. Okay. Unless anybody knows. Okay. Are there any other questions other than trying to, ask Graham questions that he has no way of knowing through no fault of his own? Yep.
Senator, I think that Graham was trying to be helpful to the committee, and
Graham is always tries to be helpful to the committee and,
finish his
and
sentence.
tries to be gentle with us. So no criticism. Do we have any further questions? We want to adjourn in find out what the House passed, or take a recess? What's the committee's pleasure?
It
Try to
sounds
kill a
like,
little time and see if the chair comes back on again. So
Well, do we need to act today? I think we know where we want to go. It's a question of
Yeah.
courtesy to the chair. Do we want to wait till she comes back?
So we're asking questions now in preparation for when we come back on Tuesday. Yep.
Does it matter to the commissioner in terms of, as you understand the legislative process, whether we make a recommendation this afternoon to appropriations or not?
I don't know if it matters whether it's this afternoon or next Tuesday. I think from our standpoint, we're always trying to balance the legislative process with being able to communicate as transparently as possible to taxpayers. So, right now on our website, it speaks to some uncertainty on this issue. I think to the degree that House Ways and Means and Senate Finance would both agree on the language that was drafted this morning, that would offer us an opportunity to, not with full certainty, put that information on our website, but say, the winds are blowing in the direction that we think we won't have a problem here, but it's not fully across the finish line. Open to feedback on if the
Thank you.
committee wishes us to have stronger outreach, I can consider that. But I think that's what
you.
it would do, whether it's today or Tuesday. I don't think is the end of the world.
The chair sent a message that she's not going to be coming back. I think she's headed up on the Hill. I'm going to ask Faith. Faith, I do not have an agenda before me. Is there anything else on the agenda for this afternoon?
There is not.
Okay. Unless the committee has something further they would like to discuss or any questions they feel are useful at this time, I'm going to adjourn the meeting until next week. Seeing none, have a good weekend, everybody, and be interesting to come back. It was like one of those Saturday morning cereals on the floor to